Hello, my stunning pre-calculus class. We are ready for another online adventure. Today we will discuss compositions of a trigonometric function and its inverse using our unit circle. We're going to recall a few facts. Recall that we use inverse trigonometric functions when we are looking for an angle measure. So we have inverse sine of a half. Here's the ratio, and we look for the angle, which is pi over 6. Ratio, angle measure. Inverse sine. So we're looking for an angle. We're given the ratio. We're looking for the angle. And then the inverse of that, the sine of the angle measure is equal to the ratio. The sine of the angle measure is equal to the ratio. Also, I'd like for you to remember when we're simplifying expressions, we do what is inside of the parentheses first. And when we have a unit circle, any point on the unit circle, remember that the x-coordinate is the cosine of that angle, the y-coordinate is the sine of that angle. And remember also that tangent is what? Sine divided by cosine. Next, we're going to evaluate some expressions, and we want to know the exact value using our unit circle. Fractions reduced to lowest terms, no decimals. So one of the very first ones that we're going to look at will be inverse sine of pi over 4. What we're going to do is in the parentheses first. Sine of pi over 4. So we take our unit circle. Pi over 4, the positive angles, remember we're on the interior of the circle, so here's pi over 4. The sine is the y-coordinate, so it's square root of 2 over 2. So I replace the sine of pi over 4 with square root of 2 over 2. Then I have inverse sine. I'm looking for an angle whose sine is square root of 2 over 2. And this is a positive ratio. And remember, we're going to be looking for an answer, an angle measure that is in the first quadrant. So we go back to our unit circle. And again, here is the sine where we have square root of 2 over 2, and that angle is pi over 4. And that's our answer, pi over 4. Let's look at another example. Here we have inverse sine of 5 pi divided by 4. We're going to do what's inside the parentheses first. Find the sine of 5 pi divided by 4. That's a positive 5 pi divided by 4. So we look on our unit circle on the interior, and here we have 5 pi over 4 radians, and we're looking for the sine, and the sine is the y-coordinate on the unit circle, so it's negative square root of 2 over 2. I replace the sine of 5 pi over 4 with negative square root of 2 over 2. And we're looking for what an inverse sine of this. We're looking for an angle whose ratio is negative square root of 2 over 2. We're looking for the angle. And since we're doing inverse sine function, if the ratio is negative, our answer will be a negative angle in the fourth quadrant when we're going what? Clockwise. So we're going to look in our fourth quadrant, and we're going to have a sine that's negative the square root of 2 over 2, and that negative angle is negative pi over 4, which is what we have here. Let's look at another example. A third example, we're going to have inverse cosine of the cosine of 2 pi over 3. We're going to do what's inside the parentheses first. So here is the angle measure, and we're looking for the ratio. So we're going to go to our unit circle, and it's 2 pi over 3, and the cosine is a negative 1/2. So I replace the cosine of 2 pi over 3 with a negative 1/2. Now we have our inverse trig function. We're looking for an angle whose cosine is a negative 1/2. This ratio is negative, and since we're doing an inverse trig function, remember if the ratio is negative, we're going to get an answer, an angle measure that's in the second quadrant between pi over 2 radians and pi radians. So we're going to go to the second quadrant. We're looking for a negative 1/2, which is right here, which is a cosine. And that angle will be 2 pi over 3. And that is our answer, 2 pi over 3. Let's look at another example, a fourth example. We're looking at inverse tan of a negative pi over 4. We're going to go back and remember our functions where we have our even odd functions. Tangent is an odd function, so the tan of a negative angle is the same thing as a negative tan of the positive angle. So then we're going to look at the tan of pi over 6. Pi over 6 is in the first quadrant, so here's pi over 6. And remember that tangent is sine divided by cosine. Remember our shortcut where we covered up the denominators? And then we said that our answer will be the numerator of the sine divided by the numerator of the cosine. So it's going to be what? 1 divided by square root of 3. But since we had a negative sign right here, this is going to be a negative 1 over square root of 3. Inverse tan of a negative 1 over square root of 3. We're looking for an angle whose tangent is a negative 1 over square root of 3. Well, this ratio is negative, and since it's an inverse tan, we're going to get an answer that's in the fourth quadrant between 0 radians and a negative pi over 2 radians. So we go to our unit circle, and we know we're going to have a negative angle, and we're looking for the tan that's a negative 1 divided by square root of 3. So see right here, the sine divided by the cosine. Remember, the denominators cancel out. So it's the numerator of the sine divided by the numerator of the cosine. And we're getting negative 1 over square root of 3. And that angle, again, is negative pi over 6. Now, we did a lot of little review there when we did our inverse trig functions. So remember that when you are looking at this video, you want to stop, rewind, review. Stop, rewind, review until you understand what we've been talking about. I love going out to you.